Sawadee krap. Thank you so much, Dr. Tamman, and thank you all, Khon University, sponsors, friends, distinguished colleagues. This is a very, very important discussion, and we are very pleased, Nancy and I, to be in it with you. I want to make sure I understand the slide clicker. Yes, I do. Good. This discussion, this collaboration between government, academic, and business leaders is extremely valuable, and the challenges are very urgent. The world is, as Dr. Tamman said, moving to cities, to Khon Kaen, to other Thai and other Asian cities, and across the world. We are in an increasingly urban world where the majority of people, economic activity, and carbon generation is happening in cities. But this is not an inevitable march of progress. As Minister Suet said, there are traps of unsustainable growth that we must avoid. There are big questions that you as leaders and as public administrators must work together to answer. One, can we improve the performance of cities in the face of these challenges? Can we get better at what cities do? Can we move more quickly than government usually does because of the urgency of these challenges? Can we innovate and improve at a faster pace because the times demand that speed? Better? There we go. Can we outgrow the old idea that national governments are the senior government and local governments are the junior government? That idea no longer is helpful. Again, at a time where economic activity and progress will occur or not occur in cities, national and local governments must work together as partners rather than as senior and junior. That is the economic and demographic reality. My city, I am proud to say, has gotten some things right at this time where if we get cities right, we get the future right. Portland has done some things right, and we have been honored, not only here today, but to have been recognized around the world. When Pope Francis published his encyclical on climate change, Laudato Si', on climate change and human suffering, he invited not 50 environment ministers from national governments, but 50 mayors from around the world to come to the Vatican to talk about how to make these ideas real in our world. And I was honored to be one of those mayors. When the C40 organization of 93 cities around the world with climate action plans decided to honor the best climate action plan in the world last year, they honored our city, and I'm very proud of that. In fact, we brought some booklets that are outside on the table if you're interested in that movement among cities towards climate action. So I will tell you some stories about Portland, and I hope you enjoy them. But your takeaway from those stories, I hope, will not be that Portland is unique, that our experience is so special and so different from other cities. That's not what I believe. Portland was an unremarkable city, an ordinary place that has become extraordinary by the application of three principles that I think, if followed, will positively affect any city. First, and it's why you're so important to be here, the power of ideas. The power of ideas. Finding good ones, often by stealing them from other cities. In the U.S. Conference of Mayors, we say we want all mayors to be thieves. We want them to steal good ideas from each other. That is permitted. That is legal. Steal good ideas. Find them, borrow them, steal them, bring them to your city. And of course, find the bad ideas and oppose them. Not all ideas are good. So first and most important is that power of ideas. Secondly is the importance of partnerships. As we've already heard here today, and you'll see in these stories of Portland, very little happens by any one of these partners or leaders alone. Business alone can solve few problems. Citizens alone can solve few problems. Government alone, likewise. Third, the quality of persistence, taking the time to try it and try it and try it again. Take the long view, even while always looking for the opportunity to make your vision happen. Sometimes things take longer than they should, but if it is the right idea, and if you have the right partners, if you persevere, you will make the good thing happen. So let me take you on a quick tour of my city over time and talk about some of these themes in the context of what has happened in Portland. Portland is a young city. It's located on the west coast of the United States along a great river, the Columbia, and was settled by non-Indigenous people. People like me and my ancestors started coming to Portland in the 1850s. By the late years of the 1800s, the city was starting to grow into a bustling commerce and agriculture center, something like Khon Kaen. There was rich farmland nearby. This is where the farm products were loaded onto the ships and taken to the rest of the world. So by the late 1800s, Portland was growing, it was booming, and people were starting to shape the fabric of the city and the lifestyle that people would live there. In 1905, Portland hosted a world exposition, and the growth accelerated. Many of us live in homes that were built in those early 1900s years because it was a boom time for Portland. And of course, you can see by the streets, it's starting to get crowded. Most people are walking, some are still using horses, and of course, electric streetcars, a good idea that was started in Richmond, Virginia, and moved all over the United States. Streetcars were all over Portland in those years. In those early years in the 1900s, another good idea. We decided to plan for a park system for a great city. We didn't come up with that idea on our own. We heard that one of the greatest landscape architects in the United States, John Charles Olmsted, the stepson of the man who designed Central Park, was doing a parks plan for Seattle. And we said, while you're in the neighborhood, could you perhaps come to Portland and do this work? And in fact, a parks board, something like these social enterprises of Khon Kaen Think Tank or Samut Sakon City Development, this parks board of business leaders in the city invited Mr. Olmsted to come to Portland and plan a parks plan. Good idea. But the city was growing so fast and budgets were so tight that they actually didn't do much with this plan in the first few years. The mayor at the time said, we can't afford this. And so very little happened for the first few years of that parks plan. It was a good plan, but it took a while to get started. By the post-war years, Portland was booming even more, and the big issue of our future and the shape of our growth was beginning to become clear. We still had the streetcars. We were still a walkable urbanism, but the automobile was becoming extremely dominant. This is true all across the United States and, of course, in many parts of the world. The automobile was a powerful force, and the vision of the good life was living far from the city center, on a lot with plenty of room, and with your neighbors not too close, and driving everywhere. That vision took over the United States in the middle part of the last century. This is a postcard from the 1950s in Portland. It says, be careful crossing the street in Portland. In other words, there's so much traffic that if you still tried to walk in the downtown, you were taking your life into your hands. Again, not an unusual case. Portland was pretty much like all other American cities, almost all of which did this. Took their streetcars to the edge of town, burned them, and replaced them with, in some cases, buses, but mostly with people driving. This was a conspiracy by Standard Oil, General Motors, and Firestone Tires that was later punished by a fine from the United States Department of Justice of $5,000. for tearing up and destroying the streetcar systems all across America. That has to be the best cost-benefit ratio of any crime in history. And it was true in Portland as well. We threw away a 200-mile streetcar system in the middle years of the last century. And here's the case of a bad idea. We hired Robert Moses, the man who changed forever the shape of New York City, to come and do a freeway plan for our city, with freeways running here and there all over the landscape of our neighborhoods. Fortunately, we only built a little bit of what Mr. Moses drew on his plan. This is a case where, fortunately, we didn't move quickly to build the plan. And we destroyed so much in those years in the name of the automobile. You may have noticed this building in one of the earlier photographs. It was the principal hotel in our downtown, a grand old structure. In the 1950s, it was demolished in order to build a gas station and a parking lot in the very center of our city. That wasn't the only place where this violence occurred. If you look at the slide on the right, that looks like a city after it has been bombed, but it is actually the landscape of downtown Portland in the middle years of the 1950s and into the 1960s, where many of the great old buildings had been torn down in order to accommodate parking. We failed to heed this warning from the great urbanist Lewis Mumford, who said Americans will soon have every way of moving around the city and no reason at all to go there. It was unfortunately very true about our city. So again, one of the myths about Portland is that we've always gotten it right. We have not. We've made great mistakes, but we have used ideas, partnership, and persistence to fix those mistakes and just chart our way to a better future. But by the 60s and 70s, downtown Portland was, some of us remember, a pretty sad place. Most of the prosperity was fleeing to the suburbs. The edges of our metropolitan area were growing, while the center of our urban core was rotting. And an idea germinated in those years with leadership, political leadership, and others saying, wait, there's only so much land. There's only so much good farmland. And cities that grow without planning, without limits, are not going to be good places. And so the idea of urban planning being a state mandate was born and enacted into law in the 1970s in our state. And this slide is a little hard to see, but it is a metropolitan area urban growth boundary. It says inside of this line, they won't have any, the farmland will be sacrificed, but we will allow development and require it to be more dense. But then there will be a line, and outside of that line, there will be farmland, preserved and continued for agricultural use into the future. And that policy has now been in place for more than 40 years, and it is very clear that it was indeed a good idea. There's a benefit to people living in cities, not just to preserving the farmland because it's beautiful, but because it gives us access to wonderful food. Portland, like Khon is a great food city, and we now have access to amazing, wonderful quality local food because we didn't sacrifice all of our farmland to urban growth. And so that led to this vision, and a vision shared by people who live in Portland or who have chosen, like I did, to move to Portland because I liked that vision better than where I used to live, outside of Washington, D.C., to say, I want to live in a dense green city. We have an expression in the United States of people voting with their feet. I voted with my feet and walked, well, didn't walk across the country, drove across the country to Portland in order to live the way that I wanted to live. And this idea is a very powerful one of the good life in an urban neighborhood. Not that the good life is in the suburbs, but that the good life is in the city. Now, if that's an idea that's going to be widely shared, how are people going to move around? If the good life is in the city and we're all driving cars, is it still going to work? Is it still going to be a good life? The answer is no. There is not enough space in the city to accommodate all those cars. And when you think about it, the people in those cars, they don't take up that much space. And if they're on bicycles, they take up very little space. And if they're sitting together on a tram or a bus, they take up even less. So perhaps we should use our urban land intelligently as well and start to build around transit instead of around the automobile. Now, sometimes leadership is about breaking the rules. And one of the rules that was broken is that the federal government, our senior government, had money for Portland to build another highway. The leadership of our city at the time said, we really don't want to do that, and found one line of law that said they could divert those funds to build light rail. So the vehicle on the left, the white vehicle, is our regional light rail system. The first piece of that system was built by transferring money that was intended for a highway to the first light rail line. And it was a great success. And it led to the planning of a regional system that now serves our whole metropolitan area of light rail trams that connect the whole metropolitan area and allow people to live with much less use of the automobile. But the streetcar is a different story. It is a story of the city having a vision of urban life, of people choosing that dense urban lifestyle and supporting that with a transit option that allows people to never use their car at all in daily life. Now, again, don't develop the impression that this has always been happy consensus in Portland. Our regional transit agency, our equivalent of KKTS, was completely opposed to the streetcar. They said, you're distracting us. We're trying to build this regional system. Why do you want to build a little streetcar loop in the old part of the city where you have all this empty land when we have all these people to move in the region? And in fact, one of my friends at that transit agency used to call the streetcar the donkey trolley. Why are you building the donkey trolley? So we got no help from the national government, no help from the state government. We built the streetcar ourselves. And we used the streetcar to support a pattern of development in our central city that we believed that people wanted to live in, and we used it to connect institutions that we believed were our future. Portland State University itself, our medical university, Oregon Health Sciences University. If you look in this slide, you'll notice along the river there's a bunch of empty land, very close to the downtown core. The vision was that the streetcar would allow this land to develop at a much greater intensity, with a much less use of energy, particularly transportation, if we used the streetcar for that leverage. Now, we also, at the same time, were thinking we would like to be a bicycle-friendly city, or at least some of us were thinking this. And again, don't develop the impression that Portland has always reached easy consensus about these things. There were protests. There were people arrested for riding their bikes where it was illegal to ride a bike in Portland. There was a group called Critical Mass that rode across the city and challenged the police officers to arrest them because they believed it should always be legal to ride a bike in a city street. It took some time for that good idea to turn into city policy, but it did. And in fact, Portland developed a bike plan that started with a very modest network and then grew it over time to a very robust bike network. This in a climate where it rains a lot, so we're not necessarily the most hospitable place to ride a bike. But many people want to, and in fact, the use of the bicycle for transportation in our city has exploded because we created a safe and complete network where people can ride their bikes. Now that streetcar, our hope, our idea was that it would foster a different form of development than that sprawling suburban development that was so common in America in the early 1990s. But we didn't actually know that it would happen. And so we built the streetcar into streets like this and then did the planning that would allow the private sector to move that vision forward. And they did. The Portland streetcar has been the most powerful redevelopment tool in the history of our city. There's now about $12 billion worth of new development along that streetcar line that wasn't there 20 years ago. And we also used a rather innovative idea, an aerial tramway, to connect that streetcar to the Oregon Health Science University up on the top of the hill. And so these districts that were our petri dish for growth exploded in positive growth for our city. The Pearl District, which you may have heard of, and the South Waterfront. We also have used public-private partnerships to good effect. The streetcar was really advanced by a social enterprise, again, much like the ones that are here. It's called Portland Streetcar Incorporated. It was led by local business leaders with a board of directors to push and partner with city government to make this vision happen. Likewise, at our airport, we hoped to get our regional transit system to our airport, but we didn't have the funds, we didn't have the means to do it. But what we did have was some land next to the airport. So we partnered with Bechtel and 4 or 5 other local governments, the city and other governments cooperating with a private sector partner, and built both a transit-oriented development project and a 5-mile-long light rail extension to our airport. It's now very successful, and it, like the streetcar, has become a model for development across the United States. Now remember that parks plan? I said we hired this guy, he gave us a good plan, but it kind of became a shelf study, as we say. It sat on the shelf, not much happened with it for the first few years. But later, it came back to life. People kept that plan, our parks planners in the city kept that plan in their desks, even though it was now 50 years old. And when the opportunity came along to start carrying it out, some people found those opportunities. And so there was a piece of land that was condemned for unpaid taxes in the West Hills, about 1,000 hectares of land. And fortunately, the county said to the city planner, "Would you like this land?" And this planner had the good sense to say, "Yes, please." And it became a key part of what we call Forest Park, the largest urban natural area in the United States. And likewise, visionaries said, our downtown should not be a freeway, it should be a park. Remember that beautiful old Portland Hotel site that turned into a parking lot? Other visionaries, community leaders, said, let's make that a downtown square, the heart of our city. And they led the effort to make that happen. We've used those kinds of partnerships in other great parks, by the way. Another ingredient, I think, of Portland's success, and one of the reasons why I'm so excited about these social enterprises I'm hearing about here in Thailand, is that a city might not be able to shoulder the responsibility of such a complex and focused project as that downtown square, or as our Japanese garden, or like our Chinese garden, or even the strangest one of all, our motor speedway. All of these are city parks, but they're operated by social enterprises, nonprofit organizations that run those facilities for the good of all and to pay the bills. We have expanded that park system now more recently with voters saying, we like this progress, we'd like to see more, and voted for additional taxes on themselves to pay for more parks across the city and more community centers. That was an effort that I led, and that frankly is one of the proudest moments of my life, was seeing the kids dive into those new pools the first time. So these are the products of those 3 principles, those principles of ideas, partnership, and persistence, that we now have a city that is an envy of many others, and where 1,000 people a month are coming to move. I was very impressed by Minister Suet's point about, instead of the bigger, the better, the better, the bigger. That's exactly what's happening to Portland. We didn't set out to be the fastest growing city. We didn't set out to grow at 1,000 people a month, but 1,000 people a month are moving to our city because it is a better place. Now, I want to close by saying this isn't just the Portland story. Other cities in the United States where I have worked with completely different cultures, completely different politics, have also used those same 3 principles to make wonderful things happen. Salt Lake City is a very politically conservative place. It's very different from Portland. It is the headquarters of the Mormon Church. They have now a very effective regional rail system because the city and the transit agency and the Mormon Church got together and devised a plan, along with the University of Utah, to build this system and convinced other partners to help pay for it. They now have a streetcar modeled directly after the Portland streetcar. There are now a dozen such projects across the United States. that have taken this good idea, stolen a good idea from their partner, and put it into action. Los Angeles, the city that planners in the United States love to sneer at, the place that is choked in congestion with giant freeways and terrible air quality. They now are putting us all to shame. They're building $100 billion worth of new rail projects. That's right, $100 billion of new rail projects, light rail, heavy rail, across the whole Los Angeles metropolitan area. So I hope that these three principles will serve you well as they have served us well in Portland. As a leader who wants to make things happen, I know this is how it's done. Find a good idea. Find, as we did, urban trams in the Czech Republic. Buy them and bring them to Portland. Find a parks vision for your city and find the partners to make it happen. I believe these principles are universal, and if we are going to master the challenges of fast growth and the urgency of climate change, you as leaders in academia, in business, and in government can use these three principles to shape the future that you want for yourselves and for our children. I wish you all of the best in your work together and in this great collaboration that Konkan University is supporting today with this conference. Nancy and I have been so impressed with the quality of the dialogue here and the possibilities that you have for a great future. So I hope that my remarks have been helpful to you. I want to close by saying klap kum kop, and hope that you enjoy Nancy's comments as well as mine. Thank you very much.